imagination not purely because of spectacle, but because they insist on being wrestled with. Stories that ask questions, stir echoes of myths, and refuse to be dismissed simply as entertainment. Gladiator II, 2024, is one of those rare creatures that steps onto the screen like a ripple in a still pond. The surface seems familiar, maybe even predictable, but beneath, something is stirring. Questions of legacy, power, faith, and vengeance. Welcome, literature enthusiasts, to an intimate journey through that disturbance. If you love stories that weigh on the heart, that unfurl meaning like ancient scrolls, and that hold both grandeur and grief, you're in the right place. And if this exploration moves you, please like and subscribe. Let's build this circle of curious minds together, one thoughtful conversation at a time. The story begins 16 years after the death of a hero whose echoes shaped an empire. The first gladiator we loved ended with a whisper of hope. Maximus's sacrifice, the dream of a liberated Rome planted in the hearts of a grieving people. Now, the world is still broken. The camera opens on a battlefield drenched in sun and savagery. Spears planted in dirt, soldiers collapsing in dust. Numidia conquered under the boot of Rome's new rulers. Against this burning horizon steps a young man whose grief is carved across his face. His name is Lucius, once sheltered by exile, now thrust into the arena in a twist of fate that feels both cruel and inevitable. Already, in this opening frame, we sense that the story is not built on comfort but on tragedy, an echo of the past, amplified through new wounds. Yet this sequel is not simply a rehash of what came before. It is a conversation with history, both ancient and cinematic. As Lucius rises and falls inside the Colosseum, gladiators clash and pyres burn. I find myself asking, what does it mean to carry a father's legacy when the world you inherit is built on blood? The sequel, like all great literature, doesn't give easy answers. It gives us a man descended from lost greatness, forced to wrestle not just enemies but the weight of expectation, memory, and myth. If the first film was about unbridled rage and noble restraint, this one is about inherited grief and fractured identity, filmed across bloodied sands but rooted in psychological terrain. And then there's Macrinus, played by Denzel Washington, who bursts into the narrative not as quiet confidence but as gleaming cunning. He is not a god, he doesn't pretend to be, but his presence cracks the story open. I remember watching him and thinking, here is a figure unlike any we've seen in Ridley Scott's villainous pantheon. He laughs in cold corridors. He sees horses as weapons of influence. He moves through politics like a chess master with friends and gladiators both as pawns. His charisma is unsettling, enthralling, magnetic. He doesn't just shake the arena. He shakes the themes of legacy, power, and manipulation. And in that shift, the film becomes not just about survival in the Colosseum, but about survival in the fevered halls of ambition. But this is not a lecture. This is a conversation written in dust and blood, in shadows flickering across Roman arches, and flickers of recognition in a son's eyes. It's myth wrapped in muscle, yes, but it's also bone and worry. It asks us whether stories can carry weight decades later, whether heroes whose stories fell over can shape the world after they're gone. As the twin emperors, Geta and Caracalla, loom with delusions of power, Roman duplicity unfolds in corridors of marble and corridors of fear. I feel the film speaking to me not through loud speeches, but through quiet collapses of trust, an emperor who laughs too long, a general who wavers beneath the sword of legacy, a gladiator who fights not for glory but for the memory of what could have been. This film will not always be comfortable. It will often be heavy. The CGI rhinoceros thunders through the arena. Sharks circle in watery pits. Baboons scramble like madness incarnate. But these cinematic showpieces are not there for cheap thrills alone. They are metaphors for a world caught in excess. They ask, how does spectacle dull sorrow? When power becomes performance, what becomes of the people? And when the echoes of the great Maximus fade beneath new noises, does his dream survive, or is it buried under rubble? So our journey begins not with a promise of answers, but with an embrace of questions. We'll explore how legacy becomes burden, how fear becomes power, how revenge blooms from memory, how spectacle can both illuminate and reinforce emptiness. We'll look at Lucius's journey, not as mimicry of a past hero, but as someone carving his own identity in the chimera of history and expectation. We'll sit with Macrinus's performance as a masterclass in ambition wrapped in charm. We'll peer the destroyed facades of Rome and ask what they reflect about civilization, narrative, and viewer expectation. This is not a review. This is a descent into meaning, a rest stop on the road from hero to canon. If you are with me, lean in, keep your senses alert, and your mind open. The arena is open, and the story is both mirror and echo. Let's begin. The film does not open with peace. It opens with violence disguised as inevitability. The deserts of Numidia stretch under a merciless sky, and Roman banners stab into sand like arrogant decorations. Soldiers move as if they own the horizon, their armor glinting in the heat, their chants filling the wind with menace. Into this world, we see a home interrupted. Lucius, grown now into a young man hardened by exile, once shielded by his mother's love, finds himself caught in Rome's insatiable hunger. The Numidian kingdom, long proud, is shattered by the legions, and in that collapse, the threads of fate tighten around him. Lucius is seized, torn from the simplicity of his hidden life. There is something cruel about it, how he is not just captured, but captured with intent. His identity, once secret, is recognized and exploited. He is thrown into chains, branded not simply as a prisoner, but as a man fated for spectacle. His bloodline, tied to emperors and heroes, becomes his curse. And so begins his descent not into death, but into the arena where death is entertainment. The Colosseum is reintroduced with staggering ferocity. 16 years after Maximus's sacrifice, the sands are soaked deeper with blood, and the crowds have only grown hungrier. This is not a Rome reformed by honor. It is a Rome drunk on decadence. The emperors who rule, two brothers, Geta and Caracalla, parade themselves as living gods. Their cruelty is not subtle. It is woven into every festival, every display, every speech shouted from marble balconies. They compete with each other for dominance, but their unity lies in one shared obsession: to wield Rome's people with the intoxication of fear and awe. So our journey begins not with a promise of answers, but with an embrace of questions. We'll explore how legacy becomes burden, how fear becomes power, how revenge blooms from memory, how spectacle can both illuminate and reinforce emptiness. We'll look at Lucius's journey, not as mimicry of a past hero, but as someone carving his own identity in the chimera of history and expectation. We'll sit with Macrinus's performance as a masterclass in ambition wrapped in charm. We'll peer the destroyed facades of Rome and ask what they reflect about civilization, narrative, and viewer expectation. This is not a review. This is a descent into meaning, a rest stop on the road from hero to canon. If you are with me, lean in, keep your senses alert, and your mind open. The arena is open, and the story is both mirror and echo. Let's begin. The film does not open with peace. It opens with violence disguised as inevitability. The deserts of Numidia stretch under a merciless sky, and Roman banners stab into the sand like arrogant decorations. Soldiers move as if they own the horizon, their armor glinting in the heat, their chants filling the wind with menace. Into this world, we see a home interrupted. Lucius, grown now into a young man hardened by exile, once shielded by his mother's love, finds himself caught in Rome's insatiable hunger. The Numidian kingdom, long proud, is shattered by the legions, and in that collapse, the threads of fate tighten around him. Lucius is seized, torn from the simplicity of his hidden life. There is something cruel about it, how he is not just captured, but captured with intent. His identity, once secret, is recognized and exploited. He is thrown into chains, branded not simply as a prisoner, but as a man fated for spectacle. His bloodline, tied to emperors and heroes, becomes his curse. And so begins his descent not into death, but into the arena where death is entertainment. The Colosseum is reintroduced with staggering ferocity. 16 years after Maximus's sacrifice, the sands are soaked deeper with blood, and the crowds have only grown hungrier. This is not a Rome reformed by honor. It is a Rome drunk on decadence. The emperors who rule, two brothers, Geta and Caracalla, parade themselves as living gods. Their cruelty is not subtle. It is woven into every festival, every display, every speech shouted from marble balconies. They compete with each other for dominance, but their unity lies in one shared obsession: to wield Rome's people with the intoxication of fear and awe. It is here, in this cauldron of corruption, that Lucius is thrust. His first steps into the gladiator's world are not those of a warrior, but of a captive, shackled alongside men with dead eyes and broken bodies. He breathes in the stench of rust, sweat, and despair. Around him stand veterans of the arena, their muscles corded, their stares empty of hope. Some mock him. He looks too noble, too unbroken. Others simply ignore him. The Colosseum does not care who he was. It will make him into what it needs, a body to be broken for applause. And yet, within this cruelty, the seeds of resilience are planted. Lucius remembers his mother's stories, remembers whispers of Maximus, remembers that Rome could be more than this theater of slaughter. It doesn't give him strength yet. It only gives him a question. How much of himself can he hold on to when the world demands he let go? Macrinus enters the tale here like a shadow sharpening at the edge of firelight. Denzel Washington's presence is immediate, commanding. He is not introduced in the arena, but in the corridors of power, where bloodless battles decide the fates of thousands. Macrinus is not emperor. But he doesn't need to be. His influence coils through Rome like smoke. He owns men, owns debts, owns silence. When he looks at Lucius, it is not with pity but with calculation. A young man with heritage, thrown into the Colosseum. Such a man is not merely entertainment. He is opportunity. Lucius's first fight is not grand. It is pitiful, armed with a weapon heavier than he can manage. Thrust into sand that blinds him with dust, he faces a veteran who has slain dozens. The crowd roars, bloodthirsty, eager to see another youth shredded. And for a moment, it seems inevitable. Lucius falters, stumbles, nearly falls. But in desperation, perhaps guided by memory, perhaps by instinct, he turns his weakness into cunning. He dodges, uses the environment, strikes not with polished technique, but with the raw will to live. By miracle or destiny, he survives. The crowd, fickle and voracious, screams with delight. A new gladiator has been born. Yet survival is not victory. The arena is a machine, and he is now part of it. Day after day, Lucius trains, bleeds, kills. His body hardens, his spirit cracks and reforms. He bonds with fellow captives, some who see him as brother, others who see him as rival. He learns the rhythms of the Colosseum, the cruel games of emperors who stage sea battles, beast hunts, spectacles meant to drown the people's dissatisfaction and awe. The film lingers here, showing us not just combat but the psychology of captivity. Gladiators are broken not just by swords but by routine, by hopelessness, by the silence after cheers fade. Meanwhile, the emperors loom. Caracalla, unhinged and volatile, delights in cruelty, revels in excess. Geta, colder but no less ruthless, schemes in shadows. Together, they embody Rome's decay, youthful rulers with ancient corruption in their veins. Their obsession with control makes Lucius's rise both dangerous and inevitable. A gladiator with charisma, a gladiator who begins to inspire whispers of rebellion. Such a man cannot be allowed to live unchecked. Through these early acts, the film mirrors the structure of myth. Lucius is the unwilling hero, dragged into a world of blood and trial. His survival marks him, but survival is only the beginning. Around him swirl forces larger than himself. Emperors drunk on power, a manipulator weaving webs in the dark, a people so enthralled by spectacle that they cannot see chains tightening around their necks. The first half crescendos with a grand spectacle staged by the emperors themselves. Not content with mere duels, they unleash beasts, lions, rhinos, even sharks in a flooded arena. The Colosseum becomes a nightmare circus, a vision of excess so grotesque it feels like parody, and yet it is rooted in history. Lucius, thrown into this chaos, faces not just the beast of nature, but the beast of Rome itself. His survival, bloody and improbable, cements him as more than a captive. He is now a symbol, though he does not yet know it, and though others, watching from the shadows, intend to use him for their own ends. The first half closes on a note both triumphant and foreboding. Lucius, bloodied but alive, stand in the arena, the crowd chanting, emperors watching with narrowed eyes, Macrinus smiling faintly in his shadowed box. The boy who once listened to stories of freedom has become a man drenched in blood. The question is no longer whether he can survive, but whether he can transform survival into meaning, or whether Rome will consume him as it consumed so many before. The roar of the Colosseum fades, but the echoes linger in Lucius's mind. Blood still clings to his skin. The smell of iron saturates the air, and yet above it all, the chants of thousands continue to ring. For a brief moment, he is not just a man, he is a myth being forged. But myths are dangerous in Rome. Where the people see inspiration, the rulers see threat. Caracalla is the first to sense it. Unstable, erratic, his paranoia is a weapon sharper than any blade. He watches Lucius from his gilded seat, eyes burning, lips curling into a smile that is equal parts amusement and menace. To Caracalla, Lucius is not a hero. He is a plaything, a spark to be toyed with before being extinguished. Geta, more cunning, sees deeper. He recognizes in Lucius not just danger but potential. A gladiator with noble blood, adored by the masses, could either destabilize their rule or be manipulated into reinforcing it. The brothers clash not just over empire, but over what to do with this rising star. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Macrinus sharpens his own plans. To him, Lucius is neither toy nor threat. He is a pawn to be maneuvered, a blade to be unsheathed at the right time. He approaches the young gladiator not with chains, but with whispers, promises of power, hints of freedom. He offers gifts in subtle forms, better armor, protection from certain deaths, information about enemies. He cloaks manipulation and mentorship, guiding Lucius into becoming not just a survivor, but a leader. And Lucius, hungry for something more than endless combat, begins to listen. But the arena does not rest. Each spectacle grows larger, more grotesque, designed to outdo the last. Baboon hordes unleash to shred men limb from limb. See battles staged with slaves drowning in the flooded Colosseum. Lucius fights through them all, gathering not just scars but followers. Other gladiators begin to rally to him, not because he asks, but because he represents something they have forgotten: hope. He does not revel in killing. He does not smile at slaughter. He fights with purpose, and in that purpose, others begin to find fragments of their own. It is in this crucible that Lucius transforms. He begins to remember his lineage, not as curse, but as duty. The whispers of his mother, the ghost of Maximus, the dream of Rome freed from tyranny. They grow louder with each fight. Slowly, the gladiator becomes more than entertainment. He becomes a symbol of rebellion. The emperors, sensing the shift, grow desperate. To crush Lucius's spirit, they orchestrate the cruelest spectacle yet, forcing him to fight those he has come to love. Fellow gladiators, brothers in arms, thrown into the sand with orders to kill or be killed. It is a test not just of skill, but of soul. Lucius hesitates, resists, tries to spare them. The crowd roars for blood. The emperors laugh. And in this crucible of cruelty, Lucius makes his choice. He fights, but he fights to protect, to shield, to inspire. Even as friends fall, even as his heart breaks, his defiance shines through. This moment becomes a turning point. Rome begins to whisper, not just of a gladiator, but of a savior. In taverns and markets, his name spreads. The people, long dulled by spectacle, begin to dream again. The emperors grow restless. Macrinus smiles in the shadows. And Lucius, bloody but unbroken, stands taller than ever. The climax builds when Lucius is thrown into a battle too grotesque to be forgotten. A stage war in the arena meant to mimic Rome's conquests. Hundreds of men are slaughtered for sport, the sands running red like rivers. Yet in the chaos, rebellion ignites. Gladiators, inspired by Lucius, turn their blades not on each other, but on their masters. The Colosseum becomes battlefield not of entertainment, but of uprising. Chains are broken, weapons seized, and for the first time, the emperor's laughter falters. What follows is chaos. Rome itself trembles. The emperors, enraged, call for Lucius's death, sending wave after wave of soldiers to crush him. But the arena has shifted. The crowd, once bloodthirsty spectators, now roars with rebellion. They chant his name not as amusement, but as allegiance. In that moment, Rome itself becomes divided. Rulers versus people, spectacle versus freedom. The final confrontation arrives with operatic intensity. Lucius, battered but resolute, faces the emperors themselves. Geta hide behind strategy, Caracalla behind madness, but both are dragged into the storm of rebellion they tried to control. In a fight drenched in both blood and symbolism, Lucius strikes the final blow, not just against rulers, but against the Rome they represent. The Colosseum, once their stage, becomes their tomb. And yet, victory is not peace. Lucius, standing amidst the wreckage, realizes that rebellion is only the beginning. Macrinus, ever the manipulator, steps from the shadows to claim the fruits of chaos. He smiles, cloaked in charm, ready to crown himself on the back of Lucius's triumph. In that moment, Lucius faces his greatest choice: to serve another master or to reject the cycle entirely. The film closes on ambiguity. Lucius does not seize the throne, nor does he bow. Instead, he walks away from the Colosseum, leaving Rome in uproar, leaving power unclaimed. He has become more than gladiator, more than rebel. He has become symbol, unfinished, imperfect, but enduring. The screen fades on his blood-stained face, eyes haunted yet unbroken, as the chants of Rome echo into silence. Lucius, Paul Mescal. At the core of the film lies Lucius, the boy we last glimpsed in the safety of exile at the end of the first Gladiator. 16 years later, that boy has grown into a man carrying wounds that are not visible at first glance. His character is defined by absence of his father figure Maximus, absence of peace, absence of choice. The first half of his arc is passive. He is dragged, enslaved, thrust into the blood-stained sands of the Colosseum. Yet within that passivity, there lingers an ember. Lucius's complexity comes from contradiction. He is at once the reluctant hero and the inevitable one. His lineage makes him a target, descendant of emperors, student of Maximus's story, but also makes him a symbol that others project their hopes onto. He doesn't seek glory, but when he survives battle after battle, he becomes a figure others rally behind. Psychologically, this arc mirrors the myth of inheritance. The son stepping into the shadow of a father he barely knew, unsure if he can carry a legacy that was never meant to be his burden. Symbolically, Lucius is the embodiment of Rome's possibility, an echo of Maximus's dream, but distorted by time and blood. Every time he steps into the arena, he is not only fighting opponents, he is fighting the weight of memory, the pressure of expectation, and the intoxication of the crowd. His strength is not in savagery, but in resilience, not in bloodlust, but in conviction. And that is why, by the climax, his refusal to claim the throne becomes not weakness but clarity. He understands that cycles of power are traps, and his destiny is not to rule Rome, but to remind it that freedom is possible. Macrinus, Denzel Washington. Macrinus is a force of charisma wrapped in calculation, unlike Commodus in the original film, who is driven by insecurity and hunger for approval. Macrinus is self-assured, deliberate, even amused by the chaos around him. He does not need a throne to wield power. He already owns men, debts, and secrets. He embodies the archetype of the manipulator, not the coward who hides in shadows, but the puppeteer who revels in his ability to pull strings. His relationship with Lucius is particularly rich. He positions himself as mentor, protector, even benefactor, offering gifts and guidance in the Colosseum. But beneath the mentorship lies manipulation. He does not want Lucius to be free. He wants Lucius to be sharpened into a weapon that he can point where he pleases. Macrinus thrives in ambiguity. Is he savior or is he parasite? Is he helping Rome or hollowing out further for his own gain? On a symbolic level, Macrinus represents the eternal shadow of empire. Empires are not toppled only by tyrants. They are sustained and subverted by those who learn how to bend the system for personal power. He is the man who thrives in decay, who profits from instability, who can smile while the world burns because he knows how to stand in the smoke. His charm makes him irresistible. His cunning makes him terrifying. Caracalla, Fred Hechinger. If Macrinus is calculated fire, Caracalla is unrestrained flame. He is manic, cruel, unpredictable, the kind of ruler who finds humor in torture and ecstasy in excess. His instability makes him both dangerous and strangely pathetic. Unlike Geta, who plots with patience, Caracalla thrives on chaos. For him, the Colosseum is not just entertainment. It is a mirror for his own appetite for domination. Caracalla's character is psychologically rooted in insecurity. He craves worship, craves recognition, craves the affirmation that he is divine. Yet every glance from Lucius, every cheer for the gladiator rather than himself, gnaws at him. His cruelty escalates as a response to that insecurity. If he cannot be adored, he will be feared. If he cannot inspire loyalty, he will command terror. Symbolically, Caracalla embodies the corruption of unchecked power. He is Rome's hunger made flesh, the embodiment of society addicted to spectacle. His downfall is inevitable because he is too unstable to sustain control. And yet his presence is crucial because he reminds us of the cost of power when wielded by those unfit to bear it. Geta Joseph Quinn, where Caracalla is chaos, Geta is calculation, cold, intelligent, and pragmatic. He represents the quiet cruelty of empire. He does not scream for attention. He waits, watches, plots. His rivalry with his brother is not about ideology, but about supremacy. Both want power, but Geta cloaks his ambitions and strategy. Geta's interactions with Lucius are fascinating because they are laced with recognition. He understands that Lucius is dangerous, not just because of skill, but because of symbolism. Where Caracalla sees a plaything, Geta sees a threat to stability. His moves against Lucius are not impulsive but deliberate, testing, probing, seeking to either control him or eliminate him. Symbolically, Geta represents a banality of tyranny. He is not mad, he is rational. And that is what makes him terrifying. Where Caracalla burns himself out, Geta could rule indefinitely, quietly bleeding Rome dry while smiling in the Senate halls. His character reminds us that not all villains are loud. Some dismantle the world with whispers. Lucilla Connie Nielsen. Though her role is smaller compared to the first film, Lucilla remains the emotional thread binding past and present. As Lucius's mother, she embodies memory, loss, and unyielding love. It is her earlier choice to protect him through exile that gives the sequel its foundation. Her presence, whether in flashbacks or whispered influence, haunts Lucius's journey. She is also the reminder of Maximus. Through her, the legacy of the first gladiator breathes. She is not simply maternal warmth. She is resilience, the quiet endurance of someone who has lived too long under tyranny and yet still believes in freedom. Symbolically, Lucilla represents the bridge between generations. She is the thread that connects the sacrifice of Maximus to the defiance of Lucius. Even in silence, her role is monumental. She is the voice that whispers legacy into her son's heart. Supporting gladiators and Rome itself. The other gladiators who fight alongside Lucius are more than background. They are fragments of Rome's suffering. Each scarred body, each broken man, is a reminder of the countless lives crushed for spectacle. Some embody despair, others defiance, but together they form the chorus that amplifies Lucius's journey. And Rome itself is a character. The Colosseum is not just setting but antagonist. Its walls echo with bloodlust. Its sands devour men. Its crowds are complicit in cruelty. Rome breathes, shouts, demands. And like any character, it transforms from enabler tyranny to cradle rebellion. Maximus's shadow. Though Maximus does not appear in flesh, his spirit haunts every frame. He is the ghost of what Rome could have been, the dream unfulfilled, the story unfinished. For Lucius, He is both inspiration and weight, an impossible standard to live up to, yet the only compass he has. The sequel acknowledges this by never letting his presence fade. In every chant, in every whispered memory, Maximus is there. Every great epic carries with a trail of curiosities, whispers, and peculiar details that, when gathered together, give the work an almost mythic aura beyond the screen. Gladiator II, 2024, is no exception. What makes it so fascinating is not just the story itself, but the strangeness that shaped its birth, the oddities that hover behind its frames, the facts that sound too unusual to belong to something so grand yet somehow fit perfectly in the puzzle. The first strange fact lies in its very existence. For years, a sequel to the first Gladiator was thought impossible. The original ended with Maximus dead, his story complete, his arc closed with operatic finality. And yet, in the early 2000s, whispers of scripts emerged, drafts so wild they seemed like hallucinations. One even had Maximus resurrected by the gods, cursed with immortality, traveling through centuries of war, from the Crusades to Vietnam. That version lingered like an infamous myth, Ridley Scott himself admitting he had toyed with it before shelving the idea. To imagine Russell Crowe's Maximus marching through time is almost absurd, and yet it nearly was. The final film we now watch is a much more grounded creature, but the ghost of those early scripts lingers, a reminder that art often begins in chaos before finding its true form. Another curiosity is the return of Ridley Scott himself. Nearly a quarter century after directing the original, he stepped back into the same world, at an age when most directors have long retired. At 86, his decision to direct such a physically demanding, large-scale epic is itself staggering. The production schedules, the sprawling battle sequences, the visual effects, the endless nights of planning, all of this carried the weight of his decades-long career. That he approached it not with hesitation but with vigor, insisting he could still stage gladiatorial combat as if time had never touched him, gives the film a strangeness that borders on awe. It is as though Scott himself became a gladiator of cinema, returning to the sand for one last spectacle. Then there's the casting. The role of Lucius could have gone anyone, but Paul Mescal, known more for intimate, emotionally raw performances in grand epics, became the chosen one. To see him step from a quiet, tender world of small dramas into the blood-drenched Colosseum feels almost surreal. The industry buzzed when his name was announced. How could the star of Normal People wield a gladius? And yet, it is precisely that contrast that makes it compelling. His vulnerability, his quiet intensity, brought something unexpected into the arena. There's strangeness in seeing a man who once whispered his way through love stories now shouting in defiance before thousands. And it works precisely because it feels unlikely. Denzel Washington's casting carries its own odd beauty. A legendary actor stepping into a Roman tale, playing a shadowy power broker in an empire long dead, could have felt like stunt casting. And yet, his performance slides into the fabric of the film like a blade into its sheath. Still, the idea that one of America's most iconic performers, who has played kings, warriors, and revolutionaries, now stalks the halls of Roman intrigue, is a fact that makes the mind pause. It is an anachronism turned into art. The film spectacles, too, carry strange truths. Much of what seems outrageous, the baboons, the sharks in flooded arenas, the rhinoceros charging against gladiators, are not inventions of Hollywood excess, but fragments pulled from history. Ancient Rome staged spectacles so grotesque and unimaginable that modern audiences mistake them for fantasy. That the filmmakers leaned into these bizarre truths makes the line between history and invention blur. One leaves the theater wondering, did this really happen? And the answer, more often than not, is yes. Rome was stranger than fiction. Filming itself was touched by oddities. Morocco and Malta, the locations chosen for many scenes, became living museums of ancient Rome once again. Vast replicas of the Colosseum rose from the earth, built not simply with digital tricks, but with real stone and wood, practical sets towering under the sun. There is something strange in watching hundreds of extras fill these spaces, chanting, screaming, as though time itself bent and ancient Rome flickered back to life. Extras reported feeling swept into the illusion, some even forgetting themselves and acting as though they truly were Roman citizens baying for blood. The set became less a workplace and more a temporary time machine. Another uncanny fact lies in the score. Hans Zimmer, who composed the original's iconic music, did not return. Instead, Harry Gregson Williams carried the torch. Yet within his score are echoes, haunting fragments that recall Zimmer's work, ghostly motifs that emerge like whispers of Maximus's presence. The decision to weave familiar echoes into something new creates a sonic strangeness, as though the past refuses to let go. Even musically, the film is haunted. There were also odd rumors about production delays tied to CGI animals. In one sequence, the baboons proved so chaotic in test animations that rendering them became an obsession, delaying deadlines. The irony is that the absurdity of baboons in gladiatorial combat is grounded in historical anecdotes of Rome unleashing exotic creatures for sport. Reality itself was so bizarre that digital artists had to struggle to make it believable on screen. And then there is the uncanny parallel between story and production. Lucius, dragged into the Colosseum against his will, mirrors Ridley Scott himself, dragged back into this world after years of silence, unwilling at first, but ultimately consumed by the weight of legacy. Paul Mescal, stepping into shoes that once belonged to Russell Crowe, mirrors Lucius stepping into the shadow of Maximus. Even the casting feels layered with symbolic strangeness, as though the film was not just telling a story, but reenacting one in its making. The final and perhaps strangest fact is that despite its massive scale, its star power, and its decades of anticipation, the film is not a tale of triumph but of ambiguity. Most blockbusters seek neat resolution, clear victory. But Gladiator II closes not with coronation, but with silence, not with Rome redeemed, but with Rome unsettled. The refusal to give audiences comfort is itself peculiar in modern cinema, which often panders to satisfaction. Here, strangeness is not just behind the scenes. It bleeds into the very DNA of the narrative. There is a moment early in the film that defines its pulse. Lucius, shackled, enters the gladiator's barracks for the first time. The camera does not rush. It crawls along the stone walls, dripping with moisture, catching the scratches of names carved by men who died before him. The light flickers from torches, each flame casting shadows that make the walls seem alive. The sound is not silence, but the low hum of despair. Coughs, chains clinking, murmured prayers in languages long conquered. When Lucius's face enters the frame, it is lit half in shadow, half in flame, as if the film itself is telling us, this man is already torn between darkness and destiny. Another scene pulses with a different rhythm. The first time Lucius is thrown into the arena, the Colosseum does not appear as a structure of stone, but as a living, breathing monster. The camera rises from the sand upward, revealing the immensity of the crowd, wave upon wave of faces merging into one seething organism. The sound swells, not just cheers, but screams, laughter, cries, all blending into a roar that drowns everything else. When the gates open and Lucius steps out, the world slows. The dust lifts from the ground, curling in the sunlight, every grain visible, as if time itself hesitates to watch him. The opponent enters, massive, scarred, wielding a blade like an extension of his body. The fight is quick, brutal, but it is the framing that matters. Lucius is never shown in full power, only in desperation. Each dodge is clumsy, each strike unrefined. The camera stays close, intimate, letting us feel the panic in his breath, the sweat stinging his eyes. When he survives, it does not feel like triumph. It feels like an accident the gods have allowed, for now. Midway through the film comes a flooded arena sequence, one of its most audacious set pieces. Water pours into the Colosseum, transforming the sands into a shallow sea. The sunlight gleams off the ripples, reflecting upward onto marble arches, making the whole structure shimmer as if possessed. Boats are dragged in. Slaves forced to reenact naval battles, their bodies crashing against wooden hulls as the crowd roars. Then the sharks appear. The water churns. Screams cut through the air. Blood spreads in clouds beneath the surface. The camera dives beneath, for a moment showing the horror from the perspective of the animals, sleek forms slicing through crimson water toward thrashing limbs. Lucius, thrown into this chaos, swims not as a warrior but as a desperate man, clutching at broken oars, turning anything into a weapon. The brilliance of the scene lies in its madness. It is both grotesque and hypnotic, beauty and barbarity colliding in the shimmer of sunlight on bloodied waves. Later, there's a quieter scene that stands out not for violence, but for stillness. Lucius sits alone after surviving yet another spectacle, his body trembling, his hands raw with cuts. The barracks are silent now, most men asleep or dead. He stares at his palms, covered in both blood and callus, and for the first time whispers to himself, not prayer, not plea, but his mother's name. The camera lingers on his lips, trembling, then cuts to his eyes, wet not with sweat, but with tears. The silence stretches until even the torchlight seems to fade. It is a moment of naked humanity, reminding us that beneath the myth growing around him, he is still a son who once had a home. The emperor's scenes carry their own grotesque grandeur. One banquet in particular lingers like poison. Caracalla and Geta recline on couches, draped in gold, as slaves serve dishes too decadent to be appetizing. Roasted peacocks, bowls of wine thicker than blood, platters of fruits imported from the corners of empire. The camera does not film the emperor straight on, but through reflective surfaces, goblets, pools of wine, polished bronze, making them appear distorted, as though the lens itself recoils from their presence. Their laughter, high and cruel, echoes unnaturally, filling the chamber like the cawing of vultures. This is not simply a feast. It is corruption performed as ritual. The climax deserves special attention. The stage war in the arena begins with the camera following Lucius from behind, his bare shoulders glistening with sweat, the sound of drums pounding louder and louder until they merge with the beat of his heart. The gates open and the scale explodes. Hundreds of men clash, the sand turned to mud from blood and dust. The camera weaves through the chaos, sometimes soaring high to show the scope, sometimes dropping low to show a single man's last breath. Amid this carnage, Lucius moves like a current through water, not invincible, not untouchable, but undeniable. Each movement is framed to show the exhaustion, the weight, the impossibility of his survival, and yet he keeps rising. The true brilliance of the climax is in its turn. The rebellion begins not with speeches, but with a look. Lucius locks eyes with another gladiator, battered, broken, but still alive. In that glance, an unspoken agreement sparks. Blades once pointed at each other turn outward. The shift is subtle at first, a single soldier felled, a single guard overwhelmed, but then it spreads like fire. The camera captures it like contagion, each act of defiance rippling outward until the entire arena is ablaze with rebellion. The emperors rise from their seats, shouting, faces twisted in disbelief. The Colosseum, once their weapon, becomes their cage. The final confrontation, when Lucius faces the emperors, is shot with operatic grandeur. The crowd fades into silence. The camera frames Lucius against the arches, his figure drenched in sunlight, while the emperors descend, flanked by guards. The fight itself is brutal, clumsy, more desperate than elegant. It is not choreographed to be beautiful. It is meant to feel inevitable. The final blow is framed not as glory but as burden. The camera catching Lucius's face, contorted with exhaustion, sorrow, rage, as his blade strikes. When it ends, the silence returns. The Colosseum, once screaming, now breathes only whispers. And then comes the final scene. Lucius, refusing the throne, refusing power, walks away. The camera follows him from behind once more, echoing its framing from the climax's beginning. But now, instead of drums, there is only silence, broken by the distant, fading chants of his name. The sunlight spills ahead of him, his figure swallowed by brightness, until he disappears. It is an ending of absence, of unfinished promise, of ambiguity. The Colosseum stands behind him, blood still wet on its stones, a monument to both ruin and rebirth. From the very first frame, Ridley Scott makes it clear that this is not merely a sequel, but a continuation of style, a visual and auditory philosophy that began in 2000 and now finds new expression. The filmmaking in Gladiator II is not about reinvention, but about refinement. Every tool sharpened, every technique heightened, every silence more carefully sculpted than before. The cinematography immediately sets the tone. Rather than presenting Rome and its empire in sweeping, pristine images, the camera embraces grit. The lens often hovers close to the actors, catching sweat, dust and trembling breaths. When the camera does pull back for wide shots, the Colosseum revealed in all its grandeur or legions clashing in orchestrated chaos, it does so sparingly, making each glimpse of scale feel monumental. This balance between intimacy and spectacle is Scott's signature. The audience is not just watching history, but standing in its dirt, inhaling its smoke. Lighting becomes one of the film's most powerful tools. Natural light dominates, with sunlight pouring into arenas, glinting off blades or slanting to the arches of marble halls. Interiors, by contrast, are dim and suffocating, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows, turning banquets into grotesque carnivals of flickering gold. Scott often places characters in half shadow, particularly Lucius, visually reinforcing his inner struggle between despair and duty. At key moments, bursts of light, the sun cutting through dust, flames illuminating a desperate face, arrive almost symbolically, as if nature itself comments on the struggle. The color palette extends this philosophy. Whereas the first Gladiator leaned heavily on desaturated browns and grays, Gladiator II dares to embrace richer contrasts. The sand of the arena is still bleak, but the crimson of blood, the deep indigo of night skies, and the blinding white of Roman marble are allowed to pop against it. This clash of muted earth tones and striking primaries visually embodies Rome itself, decay and splendor existing in the same breath. Editing plays its role like a heartbeat. The combat sequences are fast, fractured, chaotic, yet never incoherent. Every cut is designed to reflect perspective. In the arena, when Lucius is overwhelmed, the cuts become rapid, disorienting, mimicking his panic. But when he steadies himself, when clarity returns, the camera lingers longer, giving us the breath he manages to steal. This dynamic rhythm ensures the audience not only sees the fight, but feels the internal state of the fighter. Outside of combat, editing slows to let silences breathe. Banquets stretch on with uncomfortable pauses. Political conversations unspool with deliberate slowness, as though time itself hesitates in Rome's corridors of power. Sound design is where the film achieves some of its most haunting artistry. The roar of the crowd is not a generic cheer, but a living texture. Layers of voices, cries in Latin, laughter, whispers, all colliding into one overwhelming storm. In battle, the clash of steel is visceral, but just as important is what follows. The ringing silence after a brutal strike, the hiss of sand disturbed, the choking coughs of wounded men. Sound becomes memory. It lingers in Lucius's mind and in ours. There are moments when all sound drops away entirely, leaving only the thudding of a heartbeat or the rush of breath, pulling us into Lucius's subjective experience of survival. The score weaves itself into this soundscape with cunning subtlety. Harry Gregson Williams does not attempt to recreate Zimmer's iconic work, but instead builds upon it. Fragments of familiar motifs emerge like ghosts, woven into new compositions that swell with fresh tragedy. The music often begins almost imperceptibly, a single note held, a faint voice in the distance, before swelling in crescendos that crash like waves against stone. In quieter scenes, vocal laments drift like echoes from another world, tying the sequel back to the elegiac quality of the original. Camera movement itself becomes storytelling. Handheld shots in the arena shake with panic, mimicking the perspective of a gladiator fighting for his life. In contrast, imperial scenes are often shot with static, symmetrical compositions, reinforcing the suffocating rigidity of power. The Colosseum is frequently filmed from low angles, its arches towering like jaws about to close. While the emperors are filmed from slightly below, their authority framed as oppressive. Yet in rebellion scenes, the camera rises, framing Lucius and his allies not as ants beneath stone, but as figures reaching upward, breaking the symmetry of Rome's tyranny. Production design enhances all of this. The choice to build large sections of the Colosseum practically, rather than rely solely on CGI, gives the film a tangible grit. Dust clings to skin, torches burn unevenly, wooden gates creak with menace. The authenticity bleeds through the screen. The audience can smell the smoke, taste the iron. Even the costumes tell stories. Lucius's armor evolving over time from ragged scraps to something resembling Maximus's legacy, while the emperor's garments grow more decadent, their gold-threaded robes contrasting with the dirt-streaked gladiators who ultimately overthrow them. Even pacing functions as technique. The film dares to slow in places modern epics would not, letting moments of silence or despair stretch until they become uncomfortable. Ridley Scott understands that tension is not only in the clash of swords, but in the space between breaths, the waiting before the gates open, the stillness after the last scream fades. By holding these pauses, he forces the audience to live inside the unease rather than escape it. Above all, Scott's techniques refuse to let the viewer remain a detached observer. Every frame, every sound, every cut is designed to implicate us, to make us feel as though the blood splattering on the sand could reach our own hands. The techniques collapse distance, dragging us not just into the story of Lucius, but into the sensation of being Roman, complicit in a spectacle that is at once breathtaking and horrifying. In the end, the filmmaking itself mirrors Lucius's journey. Just as he transforms from pawn to symbol, the film transforms from entertainment to confrontation. The camera, the light, the sound, all of them begin as tools to dazzle, but end as weapons to unsettle. Ridley Scott wields his craft like a sword, not to comfort, but to cut. One of the most persistent themes that courses through Gladiator II is legacy. The entire story exists because of the shadow of Maximus. Though dead, his presence weighs heavier than any living character. For Lucius, legacy is both a guide and a burden. He is inspired by the story of the man who defied an emperor, yet suffocated by the impossibility of matching it. Every fight in the arena is haunted not only by the crowd's roar, but by the echo of Maximus's triumphs. This theme stretches outward into Rome itself. The empire is also caught in its own legacy, obsessed with repeating spectacles, trapped in cycles of conquest, unable to imagine a future not built on blood. Legacy here is both inheritance and prison. Closely tied to this is the theme of power. The film does not present power as glory, but as corruption. The emperors wield their authority not to build, but consume. Caracalla's madness and Guida's cold calculation represent two faces of the same disease. Unchecked rule. Through them, power is stripped of nobility, shown instead as parasitic, feeding on Rome's people and its future. Macrinus adds another layer, embodying power without throne. The idea that true control often belongs not to the ruler in robes, but to the man who knows how to pull strings in shadows. Against this, Lucius's refusal to throne at the end becomes radical. He breaks the chain, suggesting that true strength lies not in seizing power, but in rejecting the trap it lays. Another theme runs deep: spectacle as control. The Colosseum is not simply entertainment. It is Rome's machine of manipulation. The masses, restless and impoverished, are distracted by blood and grandeur. Violence becomes ritual. Cruelty becomes theater. The flooded arena with sharks, the baboon battles, the grotesque banquets, all of these are not excess for excess's sake, but commentary on how societies distract themselves with cruelty disguised as art. Lucius's rebellion grows precisely because he shifts the spectacle's meaning. What was once entertainment becomes revolution. The crowd, once complicit, becomes witness to a defiance they can no longer laugh away. Family, too, emerges as a theme. Lucius's journey is bound to his mother, Lucilla, and to the absent ghost of Maximus. His survival is not driven by abstract ideals alone, but by memory and love. Even in the bloodiest scenes, the film anchors him in intimacy, the whisper a name, the image a hand reaching for him long ago. This contrasts starkly with the emperors, whose family bonds are nothing but rivalry and betrayal. Caracalla and Guida embody fraternal hatred, proving that blood ties without loyalty decay into poison. The theme of family asks, what do we inherit, and what do we do with it? Freedom and slavery intertwine as another thread. Lucius begins as a free man but becomes enslaved, stripped of choice, forced to fight. His journey reverses the power dynamic of Rome itself. He is enslaved physically but never spiritually, while Rome is free outwardly but enslaved to its cycles of spectacle and violence. His resistance embodies a paradox that true freedom cannot be given by emperors. It must be seized from within. This theme resonates with Maximus's line from the first film, "What we do in life echoes in eternity," echoing now through Lucius's refusal to accept chains, even when they weigh on his wrists. A theme of cycles of empire flows through the narrative. Rome rises and falls, but always seems to repeat itself. Emperors change, spectacles evolve, but the hunger for dominance and entertainment at the expense of lives continues. Lucius's refusal of the throne becomes more than a personal decision. It is a challenge to history itself. The film suggests that breaking the cycle requires stepping away from the machinery of empire, not simply replacing one ruler with another. This theme is deeply unsettling because it asks the audience to reflect on their own societies. How often do we recycle power under new faces while allowing the same structures of corruption to thrive? Religion and the gods appear less overtly than in the first film, but still hover as subtext. The resurrection draft that once nearly defined the sequel is gone, yet echoes of it remain in imagery. The arena often feels like a temple, the gladiator's sacrifices, the emperor's priests of cruelty. Lucius's survival feels almost divine at times, not because gods intervene, but because the story frames him as chosen by fate. Yet the refusal of divine resolution reinforces the theme that salvation does not come from gods or emperors, but from human choice. Underlying it all is the theme of memory. Rome itself remembers Maximus. Lucius remembers his mother. Even the music remembers Zimmer's motifs. Memory guides characters and audiences alike, shaping decisions, igniting rebellions, haunting dreams. But memory is double-edged. It inspires freedom yet risks trapping one in the past. Lucius must learn not only to remember Maximus, but also to step beyond him, to forge his own path rather than drown in another man's story. What makes these themes powerful is how they weave into one another. Legacy feeds power. Power feeds spectacle. Spectacle corrupts family. Family struggles against cycles. Cycles test freedom. The film is not neat because empire itself is not neat. Instead, Scott crafts a mosaic where every theme reflects the others, creating an atmosphere of inevitability and rebellion, despair and hope. At its heart, the thematic engine of Gladiator II is the question of what it means to resist. Is resistance fighting in the arena? Is it seizing the throne? Or is it walking away, refusing to participate in the endless churn of empire? By the final frame, the film insists that true resistance is not victory in battle, but refusal to be defined by the systems that demand blood. This is not the closure of a hero's journey, but the opening of a wound in the audience's own conscience. Symbols breathe through this film like a second script, one written not in words, but in images, sounds, and gestures. To watch Gladiator II without noticing them is to see only the surface of sand and blood. To linger with them is to realize that every torch, every animal, every fragment of sunlight carries hidden weight. The arena itself is the most obvious yet profound symbol. On its surface, it is simply a place of combat, of spectacle. But in truth, it is Rome condensed into one circle of sand. The empire's hunger for dominance, its obsession with entertainment, its willingness to sacrifice lives for the illusion of order. When Lucius enters the arena, he is not just a fighter. He is a citizen trapped inside the empire's logic, forced to perform within a system designed to break him. The arena symbolizes both the machinery of empire and the prison of memory. By turning the Colosseum into a stage for rebellion, Lucius reclaims that symbol, transforming it from a cage into a crucible of resistance. Animals serve as recurring symbols throughout the film, each carrying layers of meaning. The rhinoceros is brute force, nature harnessed and distorted by Rome for cruelty's sake. It symbolizes both the empire's domination of the natural world and its inability to control what it unleashes. When the beast rampages beyond the spectacle, Rome's illusion of control shatters. The sharks in the flooded arena symbolize Rome's invisible violence, predators beneath the surface of grandeur, unseen until they devour. They are metaphors for the lurking dangers of empire, feeding on the blood of its subjects. The baboons, almost grotesque in their absurdity, symbolize madness, the senseless cruelty of spectacle taken too far, the point where entertainment becomes chaos. Each animal is less a creature than a mirror of Rome's psyche. Light is another essential symbol. Sunlight in the arenas often appears harsh, unforgiving, blinding, a metaphor for truth that cannot be ignored. In contrast, the emperor's halls are cloaked in flickering torchlight, shadows bending across marble walls. Darkness here symbolizes secrecy, corruption, and moral decay. Lucius is often shown moving between these two spaces, his face literally split between light and shadow. In the final scenes, when sunlight swallows his figure as he walks away, light ceases to be a harsh judge and becomes a symbol of release, of stepping beyond a cage of empire into something unclaimed. Blood itself is a recurring motif, but not simply as gore. Blood in this film is memory. Each time it spills, it recalls sacrifices past, particularly Maximus's death. When Lucius's hands are drenched in blood, the camera often lingers on them, framing them as both stained and sanctified. His hands symbolize transformation, from innocence to burden, from pawn to symbol. Blood connects him to his legacy, but also marks the cost of carrying it. Food and feasts carry their own symbolic weight. At the emperor's banquets, the grotesque excess of roasted animals, overflowing wine, and golden platters symbolizes corruption dressed as beauty. The more they consume, the more hollow they appear, their wealth revealed as a mask for decay. These meals symbolize the empire's appetite, endless, destructive, unsustainable. In contrast, the gladiators' barracks are marked by hunger, thin rations, scraps of bread. The contrast between feast and famine becomes a visual metaphor for Rome's inequality, its imbalance of power. Fire recurs as both destruction and purification. Torches flicker in the barracks, symbolizing fragile hope. Bonfires burn after battles, symbolizing both mourning and cleansing. In one striking moment, flames rise behind Lucius as he delivers a fatal blow, framing him in an aura that makes him appear almost mythic. Fire here becomes ambivalent. It is Rome's tool of domination, but also the spark of rebellion. Weapons, too, become symbolic extensions of identity. Lucius begins with borrowed blades, clumsy, ill-suited to his hands. Over time, as he survives and grows, his weapons begin to resemble those of Maximus. Sturdy, purposeful, wielded not for spectacle but for justice. Each weapon symbolizes not just survival but transformation, marking stages of his becoming. By the climax, when his blade is turned against the emperors themselves, it is no longer just steel. It is history, sharpened into action. Even silence becomes symbolic. The moments when all sound falls away, when the roar of the crowd cuts to nothing, when Lucius hears only his own breath, symbolize truth breaking through spectacle. Silence here is not emptiness but revelation. It forces the audience to confront what lies beneath the noise. Fear, grief, memory, resolve. The emperors themselves are symbolic figures. Caracalla embodies chaos, indulgence, the instability of unrestrained power. Geta embodies calculation, coldness, the cruelty of logic without compassion. Together they symbolize the dual sickness of empire. Madness and order fuse into tyranny. Their twin rule becomes a metaphor for Rome itself, torn between impulse and rigidity, both leading to decay. Macrinus's character symbolizes ambition without throne, the truth that real power often lies not in crowns but in manipulation. His silk robes, his golden rings, his calm smile, all symbols of a man who thrives in shadows. He becomes the serpent of the story, symbolizing temptation and the dangerous allure of cunning. Finally, the ending itself is symbolic. Lucius's refusal of the throne and his walk into sunlight symbolize breaking cycles. Rome offers him everything, power, glory, history, and he refuses. His departure symbolizes the radical possibility that true victory lies not in seizing empire, but in stepping away from it. In that final image, he becomes less a gladiator and more a symbol of resistance itself. The man who chose not to play the game Rome demanded. Taken together, the film symbols form a tapestry of meaning. The arena is empire. The animals are its madness. Light is truth. Blood is memory. Fire is both domination and defiance. Food is corruption. Silence is revelation. Weapons are transformation. Emperors are sickness. Macrinus is temptation. And Lucius, walking into sunlight, is a possibility of breaking history itself. Lucius stands at the center, not as a ready-made hero, but as a man learning what it means to carry both memory and burden. He begins as someone displaced, exiled, stripped of security his mother once tried to shield him with. His first steps into the arena are not glorious. They are clumsy, frightened, raw. And yet, that fragility becomes his greatest strength. Unlike Maximus, who entered as a soldier already hardened by war, Lucius must grow into his role, must stumble before he can rise. This makes his arc not one of inevitability, but of becoming. Each scar carved into his body is not just pain, but scripture, writing his transformation into his very skin. He is not a hero forged in perfection. He is a hero etched out of desperation. By the end, when he refuses a throne, he transcends even Maximus, for he rejects the very machinery of power that consumed his predecessor. Lucius becomes a symbol of resistance through absence, the man who walks away rather than the man who conquers. Macrinus is a different force altogether, played with magnetic weight by Denzel Washington. He embodies the allure of ambition without limit. He is not driven by madness or ideology, but by cunning, and in that, he becomes both terrifying and fascinating. He is the spider in the web, the quiet storm behind the spectacle. His gestures are subtle, his smiles calculated, his laughter edged with threat. Yet what makes Macrinus such a compelling character is that he is not a caricature. He is charming, intelligent, even likable at times. He represents the kind of power that thrives not through brutality, but through seduction. His gladiators trust him, even as he uses them. His influence spreads not by decree, but by whisper. He is a portrait of how empires are truly run, not always by emperors, but by those clever enough to bend systems to their will. If Lucius is the soul of resistance, Macrinus is the embodiment of temptation, the reminder that intelligence without morality corrodes into manipulation. Then come the twin emperors, Caracalla and Geta, grotesque mirror images of Rome's sickness. Caracalla, unhinged and theatrical, represents the chaos of indulgence. He laughs too long, shouts too loudly, devours pleasures until they devour him. He is the face of empire at its most absurd. Power turned to parody. Cruelty performed as entertainment. Geta, on the other hand, is the face of cold calculation. He speaks less but cuts deeper. Where Caracalla rages, Geta plans. Where Caracalla indulges, Geta restrains. Yet both are equally destructive. They symbolize the futility of choice within empire. Chaos or calculation, indulgence or repression, both paths leading to ruin. Their fraternal hatred crystallizes into one truth. Family without loyalty is poison. Power without purpose is rot. Their presence on the throne is less about ruling than about exposing Rome's inevitable collapse. Lucilla, though quieter in presence than before, remains vital. She is a thread of continuity, the bridge between the past and the present. Her love for her son becomes a quiet anchor of the story, reminding us that even amid empire and spectacle, intimacy matters. She carries the grief of Maximus, the weight of Rome, and the tenderness of motherhood all in one gaze. Her absence when Lucius is in chains deepens his despair, but her memory fuels his fight. She is an invisible presence in every decision he makes, her voice a silent prayer guiding him even when she cannot be by his side. In her, the film reminds us that empire is not only fought in arenas, but also in the quiet rooms where mothers whisper to their children, planting seeds of resilience that bloom years later. Supporting characters in the gladiator ranks add texture to the story. They are not faceless bodies, but fragments of humanity. The scarred veteran who teaches Lucius how to survive, the young fighter who dies too quickly to be remembered by the crowd, but whose absence burns in Lucius's eyes, the comrades who turn rebellion into a chain reaction with a single glance. These characters symbolize solidarity born in suffering, the idea that even in cages, community can ignite revolutions. They may not be named in history, but the film honors them by giving them weight in Lucius's journey. Even the Colosseum itself, as strange as it may sound, functions as a character. It is alive, breathing, roaring, swallowing men whole, spitting them out as corpses or symbols. Its walls watch silently, indifferent to suffering, yet they also bear witness to transformation. It is both villain and stage, monster and muse. By the end, when it becomes a site of rebellion rather than submission, it too has changed, its meaning rewritten. Together, these characters form a tapestry of contradictions. Lucius embodies vulnerability, growing into defiance. Macrinus embodies intellect twisted into manipulation. The emperors embody power collapsing into rot. Lucilla embodies love persisting amid despair. The gladiators embody solidarity. And the Colosseum itself embodies history's duality, cage and crucible. The greatness of these characters lies not in their perfection, but in their fractures. Each is broken in some way, and through those breaks, meaning seeps out. Lucius's fear, Macrinus's charm, Caracalla's madness, Geta's coldness, Lucilla's grief, all of them become mirrors to the audience. They remind us that stories endure not because of flawless heroes, but because of flawed humans caught in impossible worlds. In the end, the characters of Gladiator II are not just figures in narrative. They are archetypes in a myth retold for a modern age. They carry symbols, themes, and histories in their bodies. They bleed meaning as much as they bleed blood. And through them, the film does not merely entertain. It resonates. Paul Mescal steps into the impossible role of Lucius with a performance that thrives precisely because it does not attempt to mimic Russell Crowe's Maximus. Instead of stoic command, he gives us trembling vulnerability, a man who bleeds, fears, and falters before he rises. Mescal's body is central to performance, lean but scarred, tense with exhaustion, every muscle carrying the memory of struggle. His physicality conveys not triumph but survival, shoulders slumped after each battle, fists tightening against unseen despair, eyes darting as if haunted by invisible ghosts. And yet, within that frailty, Mescal lets a slow burn emerge. The way his voice steadies in speeches, the way his stance shifts from slouch to upright, the way his gaze grows steadier. These subtle changes track Lucius's evolution. By the end, when he refuses power, his performance communicates not weakness but conviction. It is a portrait of a man who learns strength not from victory, but from loss. Denzel Washington as Macrinus is a performance that electrifies the film with a different voltage. His very presence alters the rhythm of scenes. He does not need to shout. His whispers carry weight. He does not need to lunge. His stillness is predatory. Washington's genius lies in his ability to embody contradictions, warmth and menace, charm and ruthlessness, mentor and manipulator. He gives Macrinus layers that prevent him from being a stock schemer. A raised eyebrow, a slight smirk, a pause before a line. These micro-gestures turn every moment into a masterclass of controlled performance. His voice, deep and deliberate, wraps every word in velvet even as it hides a blade beneath. Watching him opposite Mescal is like watching fire and ice circle each other. One raw, emotional, learning. The other smooth, calculating, already knowing too much. Fred Hechinger's Caracalla becomes a performance of excess. He leans into madness with unnerving authenticity. The kind of laughter that rings too long, the gaze that flickers between childlike glee and psychotic rage. He does not play Caracalla as a villain to be feared, but as one to be unsettled by. Unpredictable in every gesture. His performance embodies the idea that power without restraint is not majesty but absurdity. When he screams at gladiators to kill, when he claps like a child watching animals fight, Hechinger makes the audience recoil not just from cruelty, but from the grotesque theater of indulgence. Joseph Quinn as Geta is his counterbalance, cold, sharp, deliberate. Where Caracalla sprawls and laughs, Quinn keeps his body contained, his lines clipped, his expressions minimal. His restraint becomes menace. Each word he utters feels carved, each glance weighted with silent calculation. His performance is chilling because it reveals how cruelty can wear the mask of rationality. Together, Hechinger and Quinn create a duet of decay, madness and logic fuse into tyranny. Their performances make the emperors unforgettable not because they are grand, but because they are grotesque reflections of Rome itself. Connie Nielsen's return as Lucilla brings gravity and continuity. She does not dominate screen time, but every second she is present feels carved with emotional depth. Her face carries decades of grief and love, etched into the lines around her eyes. Her performance is quiet but devastating. The gentle tremor in her voice when speaking of Maximus, the way her eyes linger on her son as though memorizing him for when she can no longer see him. Nielsen understands that Lucilla's power lies not in spectacle, but in stillness. Her presence reminds the audience that love, memory, and family are forces as strong as any sword. She anchors the film emotionally, her subtle gestures carrying more weight than entire battle scenes. The supporting cast of gladiators brings humanity to the margins. Performances by lesser-known actors ground the story in solidarity. Each carries distinct presence. The veteran with tired wisdom, the young fighter with reckless fire, the quiet ally who becomes a spark in rebellion. They embody the collective, making the rebellion feel not just about one man, but about many voices converging. Even extras and background performers contribute with visceral authenticity. The crowd in the Colosseum is not a blur of anonymous faces, but a living organism, their chants and jeers brought to life by careful performance direction. They oscillate between cruelty and sympathy, reflecting Rome's shifting mood. What makes the performances extraordinary is how they interlock. Mescal's vulnerability would not resonate without Washington's predatory calm pressing against it. Hechinger's madness would be hollow without Quinn's restraint sharpening it. Nielsen's grief would not strike so deep without Mescal embodying the sun she both protects and loses. This ensemble operates like a chorus in a tragedy, each voice distinct, yet together forming harmony and dissonance that carries the film into myth. By the end, Gladiator II thrives not simply because of its spectacle, but because of its performances. They breathe humanity into history, turning archetypes into people, symbols into flesh. The film becomes more than entertainment because the actors let us see every fracture, every twitch, every heartbeat. It is not Rome's grandeur that lingers, but the trembling hand of a mother, the whisper of a manipulator, the wild laugh of a mad emperor, and the blood-soaked gaze of a man who walks away from power. Ridley Scott has always been less interested in history as a fixed account, and more in history as myth. Gladiator II continues this tradition, blending fragment of fact with waves of invention to create a Rome that feels emotionally true, if not always historically precise. In this way, the film becomes not a documentary of antiquity, but a mirror, reflecting both the Rome that was and the societies we inhabit today. Historically, the figures of Caracalla and Geta are rooted in reality, sons of the Emperor Septimius Severus. They indeed ruled as co-emperors after their father's death. Ancient sources record their rivalry as poisonous, marked by paranoia and betrayal, culminating in Caracalla orchestrating Geta's murder. In the film, this sibling rivalry is dramatized into grotesque extremes, their rule serving as a metaphor for Rome's instability. While the historical details are bent for narrative, the essence, fraternal hatred as the empire's undoing, is true to Roman history's spirit. Macrinus, too, is drawn from fact, though transformed. The real Macrinus was a Praetorian prefect who later became emperor after Caracalla's assassination. In Gladiator II, his role shifts into something more symbolic. Not emperor, but manipulator, a man of power and shadows. Scott compresses history, bending Macrinus into the archetype of the string puller, the figure who reminds us that true power often lives behind the throne, not upon it. The Colosseum itself, of course, is historically accurate as a site of spectacle, though the film heightens its excesses. Accounts of Rome's games do mention flooded arenas for mock naval battles, exotic animals brought from across the empire, and grotesque displays of cruelty. By staging sharks, baboons, and rhinoceroses in the ring, the film amplifies but does not invent Rome's appetite for shock. It is spectacle as both history and metaphor, a commentary on the empire's capacity to turn cruelty into ritual. Beyond ancient fact, the cultural context of the film resonates powerfully with the modern world. The Colosseum spectacles are mirrors for today's entertainment industry, where violence, scandal, and spectacle dominate screens. Just as Rome's emperors pacified the masses with bread and circuses, modern societies distract themselves with endless cycles of entertainment, often numbing us of real injustices. Watching Lucius fight for survival while the crowd cheers unthinkingly feels uncomfortably familiar, a reflection of how audiences today consume violence in cinema, television, and even news with detached fascination. Power, too, is contextualized for today. The dual emperors symbolize fractured leadership, their rivalry echoing modern politics, where division at the top breeds instability for all. Macrinus's manipulations resonate as a reminder that corruption thrives not always in obvious dictators, but in hidden networks of influence. The film's insistence on cycles of power, on history repeating itself through different faces, speaks directly to our time, where institutions recycle leaders while perpetuating the same systemic flaws. The cultural memory of Gladiator 2000 also shapes this sequel's meaning. The first film became iconic, not just for its action, but for its embodiment of values like honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. Gladiator II inherits that memory and complicates it. Where Maximus fought to restore Rome's honor, Lucius walks away, rejecting Rome's cycle altogether. This cultural shift reflects a broader transformation in how audiences see power. In 2000, the fantasy of a noble man fighting for justice aligned with cultural optimism. In 2024, amid disillusionment with politics and systems, the fantasy shifts to rejection, to stepping outside the game altogether. Even Scott's filmmaking style connects to cultural context. His emphasis on grit, natural light, and tactile sets reflect a cultural hunger for authenticity in an age of CGI saturation. By building real sets and grounding spectacle in practical effects, Gladiator II participates in a larger cinematic trend, the return to tactile reality as a way of combating digital excess. This choice resonates with audiences craving something that feels tangible, not manufactured. The film's release in 2024 also situates it in a world grappling with questions of empire and decline. Conversations about the fall of great powers, the ethics of spectacle, and the corruption of leadership are no longer abstract. They are lived realities. The resonance of Rome's decline with modern anxieties about global superpowers cannot be missed. Watching Rome tear itself apart through decadence and corruption feels eerily like a warning. One Scott delivers not through lectures, but through spectacle reframed as tragedy. Finally, the cultural weight of Ridley Scott himself must be acknowledged. At 86, Scott directs his film not as a young rebel, but as a master looking back on themes that defined his career: power, corruption, humanity against machinery, memory against time. Gladiator II is not just a cultural artifact of 2024, but a reflection of Scott's own legacy, his refusal to step away from epic storytelling. The film becomes, in part, his dialogue with history, both Rome's and cinema's. In this sense, the historical and cultural contexts merge. Ancient Rome becomes a metaphor for modern society. Modern society becomes a lens through which we interpret ancient Rome. Scott's Rome is not a museum piece, but a mirror polished with dust and blood, showing us ourselves. To watch Gladiator II is to stand inside a circle of echoes. Every frame reverberates with memory of Maximus, of Rome, of the first film, of Ridley Scott's entire cinematic vision. And yet, this is not a story about repetition. It is about transformation. Where the first gladiator gave us honor within the system, the second gives us rebellion against it. Where Maximus fought to restore Rome, Lucius chooses to leave it behind. In this shift, the film does more than continue a story. It challenges its own origins, daring to ask if cycles can truly be broken. At its heart, the film is about what it means to resist. Resistance, in Scott's framing, is not always about seizing victory. It is not about killing the tyrant and taking the throne. It is about the courage to refuse, to say no to the systems that consume lives and glorify cruelty. Lucius's greatest triumph is not in surviving the arena, not in rallying rebellion, but in walking away from Rome's throne. That refusal, quiet and radical, reframes the entire epic. It tells us that real freedom is not offered by emperors or armies, but by the courage to step outside cycles of domination altogether. Technically, the film dazzles. Its landscapes, music, and set design immerse us in a world both ancient and alive. Its action sequences are choreographed with Scott's trademark precision, brutal yet never hollow, always carrying symbolic weight. Its cinematography paints with light and shadow, fire and blood, silence and roar. But the brilliance of the craft lies not in spectacle alone, but in how spectacle serves meaning. Sharks, baboons, rhinoceroses, these are not excesses but metaphors, grotesque yet revealing. The Colosseum becomes both a cage and a crucible. The violence becomes both distraction and revelation. In this way, the film uses epic scale to whisper truths about humanity, about power, about history's endless loops. Performances elevate the film into tragedy and myth. Paul Mescal carries Lucius with trembling vulnerability that grows into conviction. Denzel Washington gives Macrinus layers of charm and menace, embodying the allure of ambition. Fred Hechinger and Joseph Quinn turn the emperors into grotesque mirrors of Rome's sickness, one chaotic, the other calculating. Connie Nielsen anchors the story with quiet, devastating grace. Together, this ensemble breathes life into archetypes, turning symbols into people, making myth feel human. Thematically, the film burns with resonance. Legacy, power, spectacle, family, freedom, cycles of empire, memory, all flow into one another like threads in a tapestry. They remind us that Rome is not just history, but metaphor, not just spectacle, but mirror. Watching Rome fall into decay, we are asked to see ourselves, our own politics, our own entertainment industries, our own obsessions with spectacle over substance. The film does not lecture. It seduces with grandeur, then unsettles with recognition. In cultural context, Gladiator II arrives as both continuation and commentary. It reflects Rome's history while reframing it for a world anxious about its own decline. It honors a cultural weight of the first film while daring to subvert its resolution. It gives Ridley Scott one more chance to stage the kind of mythic storytelling that has defined his career, while pushing beyond nostalgia into something raw, unsettling, and deeply modern. What lingers after the credits is not the roar of the crowd, not even the blood on the sand. What lingers is a silence, the image of Lucius walking into the light, refusing the throne. That image is the film's final symbol, its ultimate gift. It is a reminder that history does not have to be repeated, that cycles can be broken, that freedom sometimes lies not in conquering, but in stepping away. In the end, Gladiator II is not just a sequel. It is a reckoning with Rome, with legacy, with power, with ourselves. It asks us not to cheer, not to mourn, but to think, to consider the cost of our own spectacles, the traps of our own empires, the legacies we inherit, and the ones we choose to leave behind. It is an epic, yes, but more than that, it is a mirror, and in its reflection, we find both despair and the fragile possibility of release.